Welcome to the MMA Vivisection. We are here for UFC on Fox 22. Michelle Waterson, Paige VanZant. I am joined, as always, by Connor Rebish, or at least as always when he chooses to show up. He's here again this time, and he's not the reason we're late. I'm the one running late. I got caught up doing other shit. So
I actually messaged you early. I was like, I'm ready when you're ready, Zane. So
that's right. So no
I'm on
blame.
top of shit right now.
That's right. I won't hold you to that standard going forward.
I don't know what I'm getting anyone for Christmas, but I was on time for the Vivisection, all right? And you're gonna have to call my family and explain to them why it was so important. Okay? that's just what I want. That's what I'm gonna need.
I get the feeling if I did reach out and call your family, none of them would be surprised. They would all be like, "Yeah, okay, that's all."
Yeah, no, they would. No, my mom loves to talk too, so you can give her a call anytime you want. She'll be into it.
All right, so we're here to talk about this UFC on Fox 22 fight card, which it's frankly a pretty fun fight card. Honestly, I know that the UFC on Fox cards have hit a serious downgrade, and they are probably going to continue that way because the whole WME IMG purchase thing has a major. There's some major caveats hanging over that about future profitability and having to maximize it. And so more and more stars are going to be funneled onto pay-per-view exclusive.
Yep. I think we're going to see a change in how the TV cards are used going forward. I think we're going to see more of them like this, which, frankly, I'm not upset about this card at all.
No.
I think most of it's pretty fun. It's just that, like Paige VanZant is the headliner, is basically the idea. Like Paige VanZant and Sage Northcutt are arguably the biggest names on this entire card. You've got Faber on there, but in his retirement fight. And so going forward, it looks like the televised cards are just going to be sort of prospect showcases and divisions, like fights that need to happen. That may be exciting, but really they need to happen just to kind of sort out divisions and figure out who's actually going to go onto the pay-per-views.
Well, and it seems like a lot of what you're going to see, too, down the road is really going to be celebrity fighters, especially on Fox.
Sure, yeah.
It's going to because they're they're the people that they feel they can push and get attention to who aren't big proven stars yet.
Yeah.
And then there are the actual stars. And I think, Paige VanZant, Sage Northcutt, we'll see Mike Perry's on this card. He's somebody that has got a lot of people's attention. Alan Jouban.
It's like fan favorite versus star. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people show up for these guys. They're interested in them for one reason or another. Paige and Sage obviously have their Disney Channel appeal that is so incongruous with what we expect from prize fighting. But they're not. Neither of them is going to headline or come close to headlining a pay-per-view. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not close.
So it's the kind of things that, I'm as a hardcore fan, I'm happy with the card. But yeah, it's going to start getting a little less attractive to casual fans, or even just shifting the demographic to maybe something like Paige and Sage are, they're probably more must-see viewing for casual fans than they are hardcores. So.
Right. So they're going to be, I think, more top-heavy cards with less deserved attention at the top, but still a good amount of attention.
Indeed. So on that note, let's dive right into the bottom. Get talking about this. Bojan Veskovic versus Sultan Aliev.
It's a weird fight to start us off. Veskovic has not exactly cemented himself as a real talent in the UFC. He looked like a guy who had a lot of potential. He went to Elevation. We know that's a camp that's been turning out a lot of good results lately. They made Matt Brown way more competitive with Donald Cerrone than I actually thought he might be. So, and there are many, many reasons to think that is a solid camp. Couple guys there, though, have kind of come out of there with some weird ideas of what they should be doing. I was a little baffled when Dan Hooker decided to fight Jason Knight with an outboxing southpaw sniping style. Seemed really weird. That's a weird choice for him. Bojan Veskovic seems to be going the same direction. a lot of like long range, setting up kicks and long punches. And I don't think he's particularly well suited for it. Like Dan Hooker, he's kind of slow and doesn't seem super well coordinated when he doesn't have his hands on his opponent. And so it's kind of led to a lot of indecisive performances from him now in the past couple of years, or at least since his UFC debut. I think he should still be favored over Sultan Aliev just because Aliev kind of made his name beating up a bunch of guys without a ton of, relevance and knocking everybody out in the first round. He's obviously very dangerous. He does have a good amount of experience in his record, but then he comes in and gets knocked out by who was it? Kenny Robertson?
Yeah.
In the first round, which is kind of weird. And it's the kind of thing where you don't want to draw too much from that performance. It definitely seemed like a fluky thing that probably wouldn't happen again, even if those two were to fight a second time. But it does not inspire a ton of confidence in Aliev going forward. And if you're going to be that kind of stiff and hittable against Kenny Robertson, then hopefully Bojan Veljkovic should be able to get some work done. But at this point, I don't really know about either guy. So I'm going to go with Veljkovic by decision, but it is definitely a weird toss-up.
It's also worth noting that Aliev fight for Aliev was 2 years ago. So
did he have an injury or something that kept him out?
Yeah, I think he did, but I couldn't tell you off the bat what it was.
I'll look it up while you go.
Yeah, he pulled out of a fight in August of at UFC 202 with a wrist injury. So but that was still a year out. Like a year and a half after that first fight. So
weird.
I don't know. He's probably had a couple injuries, but he can check into it.
But yeah, ring rust is another thing going into this. Like, the least you can say about Veljkovic is he has been active.
Yeah. Like, it could also mean that Aliev has gotten better too. Like, he hasn't been fighting very long. He's only been fighting since 2011. So it's not exactly like he's been in this for a long time to date.
Good point.
The big problem for me with Veljkovic is that he's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. And this was one thing that really struck me when people were excited about him coming up on the regionals, and why, as his competition got better, he stopped knocking people out or stopping them, is that he's not a particularly good striker. He's not a particularly good grappler, and he's not a particularly good wrestler. He's big and aggressive, and he's big and tough. I don't even know that he's that aggressive.
He's scrappy. When he gets his hands on you, he's like surprisingly strong, a good scrambler. But you're right. Like you watch him coming up, his well-roundedness stands out. Like this guy's an MMA native. He's going to be great. He's going to know exactly what he's doing when he gets to the big show. And then he gets there, and you're like, what are you good at again? Like, what's the thing you're really good at? Where do you finish fights?
He's competitive everywhere, but he's not dominating anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
And that is a major question mark to me against Sultan Aliev, who has a very high-level Sambo background. And his striking is super stiff and wooden, but he has some power to it.
Yeah.
So I am hesitant to pick Veljkovic here. I might lean towards Aliev just because I don't think that Veljkovic can knock him out. And if he can't knock him out, I don't think he can control him.
Yeah.
So
it might be it's an interesting test of Veljkovic, the guy who doesn't seem to have that avenue for domination or finishing, against a guy who has a lot of finishes.
Yeah. And Aliev, I mean, even if he there'll be questions if he doesn't get the knockout, how will he gas? Will he get super tired?
Yeah.
And will Veljkovic be able to turn it around and work him over from that? There are questions here, but I don't trust Veljkovic to be able to physically impose himself on Aliev, and without doing that, I don't trust his game. So I'm actually going to pick Aliev here.
He did beat Mikel Parlo, by the way, 3 years ago, which is not a bad win.
No, but it was also 3 years ago. So,
but then again, it's not that long ago in terms of how long he's actually been fighting. Like, he hasn't fought for 2 years.
Yep.
And so going back, well, not quite 2 years, but he hasn't fought for about like 19 months.
Yeah.
And you only have to go back to August or February of 2013 to get a pretty solid win. Although then he went with a split decision to Doug Marshall. So who knows?
Well, that fight, he took Doug Marshall down the whole time and just stayed on top of him. And Marshall landed some shots from the bottom and a few on the feet and got one of the weirdest scorecard wins. It was like 13 minutes of control and 2 minutes of Doug Marshall offense, and he got split decision.
Well, maybe you're onto something then.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pick Sultan Aliev there, and the odds here are Veskovic, the slight favorite, opening at -210, now at -154. Aliev opening at +160, now down to +129. I'm not surprised at where those lines opened or how they've moved since. And I wouldn't bet on this fight because there are too many unknowns with Aliev going on.
The total might be interesting if there's any value there. Over 1.5 rounds, -225. No, never mind.
Yeah,
nothing there.
Nothing there.
I'm like, that would be a decent bet because they're both tough, and Veskovic is unlikely to knock Aliev out with one shot, but no value. Odds are right.
And freaking who was it? Kenny Robertson was unlikely to knock him out with one shot either. So
that's true. You got to play the averages though when you're betting on totals.
And that brings us to a flyweight bout: Hector Sandoval, Freddie Serrano. This absolutely should be a win for Hector Sandoval. Sandoval, his problems are that he's not as good a offensive wrestler as he wants to be, as he pursues, partially because he's tiny. He is just even for flyweight, he's a tiny dude. And when you have a power wrestling game and you're tiny, then that is tough. But he's got good, sharp hands. He's a consistent boxer with some power. He even put a scare into Wilson Hayes in their fight. And it looks a lot like the Ryan Benoit fight for Freddie Serrano, except with somebody who can actually wrestle and grapple a little bit more than Benoit can.
Next time we get a break, by the way, we got to watch Serrano versus Benoit for our Bad Fight series, because that was, as I've called it many times, the first heavyweight fight in flyweight history.
Yeah, I believe after this week we've got a break, so
we should really watch that fight.
We'll do that. Yeah, we'll bring back MMA Depressed Us after this weekend. So
I'm down. I'm with you on the pick. I think Freddie Serrano obviously has potential. I think he could be a Henry Cejudo in this division, a guy who's got this really stout wrestling. He's tough. He took some good shots from Benoit. He doesn't seem to lose heart. He's got that determination and the wrestling background of Cejudo. Instead, he seems to be trying to be Yoel Romero, and he's not Yoel Romero. Not everybody can go in there and just kind of randomly pick shots to throw from long range and leap across distance and get a third round knockout almost every time. It's not going to be as reliable at flyweight, and it's not going to be as reliable for anybody but Yoel Romero himself, who is just a next level athlete. So unless Serrano comes in with a serious style adjustment, which I would hope he does after that last fight, because it clearly didn't go his way and he didn't look close to winning it at any moment. But if he comes in looking like he did in the last fight, then Sandoval should be able to beat him. Sandoval throws a lot of volume. He throws everything with power. He's a very good scrambler. He's too aggressive. It is what it is. But he can go 3 rounds, and he's dangerous, and he's unpredictable for a young, inexperienced, young in the game, old, inexperienced fighter like Freddie Serrano.
Yeah, and for Serrano to it would be he might round out his game, but as a 37-year-old with 4 pro fights to his name, he just hasn't the time may not be on his side, and he hasn't had the cage time to develop the way a prospect would. There's a reason that he's as raw as he is, and it's because he hasn't had the experience.
Yeah.
Even Cejudo has more experience than Freddie Serrano.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. By a good margin at this point.
Yeah. That brings us, the odds on that fight are close to even let's see. Sandoval opening at plus 130, now down to minus 128. And Serrano opening at minus 170, now up to plus 105. If you can get Sandoval, like I can see him as low as minus 118 for one book. If you can get him anywhere close to even odds, I would absolutely look at taking that here.
Yeah, I agree.
I would not trust Serrano to win any fight in the UFC against anyone who can wrestle even a little. That's basically it. I mean, and even Ryan Benoit couldn't wrestle and still beat him. So
yeah, if you're a wrestler and you have trouble winning a decision against Ryan Benoit, then some things need to be.
I guess more precisely, I wouldn't pick him against any UFC level athlete, any truly good athlete in the UFC,
unless he makes some change, which I do think he's probably capable of making those adjustments if he's got good trainers and everything behind him. But he also strikes me as a guy who probably is easy to mislead by bad training.
Well, or just he needs time. I mean, even if he makes adjustments, those adjustments can take 3 years.
He would have been better off if he'd gone to Legacy or RFA or something like Henry Cejudo did and not come to the UFC so early, because he could have fought at a higher rate against a lower level of competition and gotten his licks.
Exactly. That brings us to Eddie Wineland, Takeya Mizugaki. Break it down.
Love this fight. I love it. I especially love it because there's still a chance that it could actually be Eddie Wineland in the cage, because he looked really sharp his last time out. We did not expect big things. He looked totally flat against. I mean, getting knocked out by Johnny Eduardo, that was rough. I think it was the first knockout loss of Wineland's career. Bad moment for him. But then coming in against Brian Caraway and getting just dominated in the least exciting way possible. Dominated in the sense that it didn't look like Eddie Wineland knew what he should be doing, and didn't seem to know how to pull the trigger anymore. That basically had us thinking, all right, we're waiting for the end with Eddie Wineland. It's over for him. Frankie Saenz, more aggressive than Brian Caraway, similar skill set, really kind of got outclassed by Eddie Wineland. He had his moments, but Wineland hurt him badly in the first round, knocked him out in the third, looked sharp, looked fast, was not afraid to throw his hands. So, I won't say he's back yet, but he could be back on any given fight, because clearly one bad run is not enough to take the fight out of Eddie Wineland. And then you've got Takeya Mizugaki, who to me is like the mainstay of the bantamweight division. He's fought pretty much everybody, especially everybody who was a part of the old guard. And yeah, he's probably not the level of athlete necessary to compete with all of the new young guys, and that has led to some more recent losses after a good run a couple years back. But he is still one of the best, all-rounders in this division. Mizugaki, way better defensively than he's given credit for, a way better counterpuncher than he's given credit for, has more power than he's given credit for. Solid wrestler, not amazing, but he can adapt given an opponent. He can pressure when he's told he needs to pressure. He can counterpunch when he needs to counterpunch. He can wrestle and stall you out, beat you up with elbows when he needs to do that. I think he'll be able to do those things against Eddie Wineland. At this point, I have more faith in Mizugaki, even though he has more recent losses. I do think he has looked pretty consistent in all of those fights. And it's basically just told me that, he's not going to be beating, the Tomas Almeidas and the Cody Garbrandts of the world, but he can still go in there against George Roop and mollywop him. And so I think he can compete with Eddie Wineland. Problem is can Eddie Wineland score enough volume or hurt Mizugaki badly enough to win this fight? Or can Mizugaki beat him with volume and with pressure? I think Mizugaki approaches this fight the same way he approached the Roop fight. Wineland is slower than he was. His chin has always been an available target, and his style relies so much on speed that I think he needed a fairly rote striker in Frankie Saenz to look fast and chippy again, and I'm not sure that he will against someone a little more experienced and crafty like Mizugaki. So this one to me also feels like a toss-up, and I'm kind of just spitting into the wind, but I'm going to pick Mizugaki by decision.
All right, I'm actually going to disagree with you on this one. Looking at Mizugaki's recent, I went back and watched that Roop fight, or at least some of the early bits of it, and I was not impressed with, and I remember not being impressed with Mizugaki.
Really? I found it to be a pretty good fight.
I thought that against a George Roop who looked as far shot as I've seen many fighters look shot in a long time, Mizugaki not finishing him and really like beating him, but not making it nearly as decisive as it could have been, was not great.
Roop looked in that fight the way Wineland looked against Caraway. Like
Roop
totally
looked,
lost.
I mean, Roop, you know, like there's a reason that he just broke his leg against Yoon Jun Lee in Road FC 31 right now.
Oh, did he?
In a minute.
Oh, George Roop.
In May of this year. Like, it's just, his body did not hold up.
Remember when he knocked out the Korean Zombie? It was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago now.
But I really feel, you know, and then beyond that, so you have Mizugaki going competitively with Aljo for a bit, getting knocked out by Cruz, getting knocked out by Garbrandt. And I just think that, I think in the striking, Mizugaki may have lost a step that he couldn't afford to lose. More so than Eddie Wineland did. I think that is maybe my biggest takeaway lately.
It's not that long ago that Mizugaki outstruck Francisco Rivera. You know, it was only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He cleanly outstruck him, you know. But you're right. I mean, getting knocked out, not really dominating Roop like it kind of seemed like he could have. But again, I think maybe Mizugaki dominated that fight as well as he can. He's not much of a finisher. He hurts you when he hits you, but he's not a finisher.
I guess I'm just saying I feel like if this is a fight entirely contested standing up, let's say Mizugaki can't get a takedown, and I'm willing to think he can't because Wineland's not the easiest dude to take down.
No, not at all.
I think Wineland, if he's not frozen up the way he is in that Caraway fight, he hits harder. And I trust more that I trust that if they both lost a step, I think that means a lot less to Eddie Wineland.
More dangerous. Like he can make up for that more effectively.
Yeah. So
you may be right.
I think that Mizugaki is just gonna. I think we may be surprised that he fades out faster here for a guy who has been always tough and always like this scrappy heart fighter all the way through. Mm-hmm. I could see him losing and suddenly being gone, and then being like, "Whoa, what happened to Kei Mizugaki?"
And then like taking the Pat Healy track and becoming a champion in Legacy or something.
Good, but so the odds on that fight, Wineland is a heavy favorite, or reasonably, opening at minus 245, now down to minus 224, and Mizugaki at plus 175. Now plus 182. So not a lot of move on the Mizugaki line, a little on the Wineland line, which
I think if you are going to bet on Mizugaki, which I don't think I would on the straight odds, I would recommend taking the Mizugaki by decision prop, which is plus 290.
Yeah, that would probably be the safest thing if you were going to bet on Mizugaki. But I wouldn't generally bet on that fight just because I think both guys have lost a lot recently, and both guys still have they still have a lot that they need to prove in terms of being competitive at a high level in the UFC bantamweight division right now. Mm-hmm. That brings us to, that's the end of the Fight Pass prelim. That brings us to the FS1 card. Leslie Smith, Irene Aldana. And, I mean, the obvious pick here is Aldana. But I think the less obvious part of this to me is that I think a lot of that pick is power. Honestly. Like, watching Irene Aldana versus Faith Van Duyn, Aldana got hit more than a little.
With some really clean shots.
And her offense, you know, she's not, despite the fact they came around at the same time, and they're, you know, have like a somewhat similar base style. She's oh man, Now, who's the other? Damn it, and you're gone. Oh, shoot. Now my brain's freezing up. Damn it, Connor, why do you leave? But Aldana's style game is a lot more limited. She is, who's the other Mexican woman fighter that's who's the other Mexican woman fighter that's recently splashed onto the scene and is in the UFC now?
Training partner of Aldana, actually. Yeah. Alexa Grasso.
So she's not Alexa Grasso. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Like, she's not as diverse. She's not as busy. She's not as complete a fighter as Grasso yet. And I think there's reason to have some hesitation about a vet like Leslie Smith, who can throw a ton of volume and is tough and can stand in and trade and is going to be in front of her and make her work. Like I say, I think the big question there really, and the reason I would pick Aldana here, is the power edge. And that Leslie Smith seems more and more like she's starting to wear the damage of a fighting career spent pretty much brawling with people straight out every fight. So I will pick Aldana as the young, hot commodity coming up. But, there's something to be said for a fighter whose best win is either Faith Van Duyn or Colleen Schneider. And it's, there's every reason to think that if Smith doesn't get hurt badly in this fight, that she could out-brawl Aldana.
Yeah, Aldana clearly looks like someone who is trained by the same people as Alexa Grasso. She's got good straight punches. She's got some pop. She moves her feet fairly well. All of the really basic fundamentals are there. They both look like fighters who spend a lot of time really studying one textbook on boxing for beginners. The difference is that Aldana is not as good defensively. Not that Grasso's incredible, but she's not as good defensively. And I think the thing I saw in that Faith Van Duyn fight is that maybe she gets a little frustrated. She looks like a more inexperienced fighter. She's not older than her years, like Alexa Grasso seems to be in the way that she deals with pressure. She seemed to get frustrated that she couldn't knock Van Duyn out in that fight, or that she wasn't hurting her enough. And so she actually was pretty hard to hit for the first minute or so, and then just started marching Van Duyn down and just walking into counter right hands. And that's when she started to eat a lot of big shots. And Leslie Smith is probably not even as fast or as athletic as Faith Van Duyn, but she throws a lot more. She's very scrappy and awkward with the way that she attacks, and she is frustratingly hard to put away. And so, yeah, I can see Smith at some point getting into Aldana's head and starting to take over the fight. But Leslie Smith has no pop whatsoever in her hands, and that is the problem for her. If she could punch, she could be the Diaz sister of this division. Unfortunately, she really can't punch that well. She's because her form is not good. Her feet aren't planted, her arms are wide, her elbows are flared. She just kind of does a lot of slapping, and that's why she could beat Aldana. Like you, I'm going to go with Irene Aldana, just because I think I'm hoping she'll take this fight really seriously because it's her first big step up into the UFC. Smith has looked faded a little bit in recent outings, hasn't really been able to come back the way she once did. And Aldana, she has the power. She can really crack when she throws. So if it's going to take somebody getting hurt to decide a pivotal round, it's more likely to be Aldana taking that round than Smith.
Yeah. The only other fear I would have is if Smith can hit some takedowns. If Aldana's takedown defense isn't there, then Smith may be able to stay ahead of her on the ground.
Maybe.
So it's now the odds on this are the odds on this fight are pretty wide. Aldana at -288, or what? Now let's see. That's right. Aldana opening at -230, now at -309. So they're wide and getting wider. And Smith opening at plus 170, now up to plus 244. I honestly think that's a little bit of a mistake. I don't know that I would bet on these odds. Maybe, Smith as an underdog, maybe. Might not be the worst bet, but I would think of, like, to me, this is more of a, like, Aldana should be in the minus 150, 200 range, and Smith in the plus 100, 150 range.
Yeah, actually, let me check something real quick. Okay, so the only way I bet on this fight would be that it goes the distance. I think, let's see. It goes the 3-round distance. I can't find it on best fight odds, but my book currently lists that as the fight going all 3 rounds as minus 135. And I think that's not a bad bet. And then the other one I might consider if you're really hungry for an underdog odd is Smith by decision, which is like plus 300 something. Let's see, Smith by decision. Plus 390.
Plus 390, yeah.
So those are the only ways I would consider it. But then, like, you're banking on the underdog, the heavy underdog to win. And I do think that Smith winning this fight is less likely than by a pretty good margin than Aldana winning. I think it's it's safer to bet on her being much harder to put away than Aldana expects.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Aldana, these are hype odds for Aldana. I think that's the important thing to note.
Yeah, for sure.
Aldana has really not proven a lot other than that she is a prospect to have high expectations of.
Won't be the only hype odds we see on this card.
No. All right, and that brings us to the lightweight bout, Josh Emmett, Scott Holtzman.
Interesting fight. Josh Emmett, really impressive in his UFC debut. I think he was in the midst of a camp, but still he came in and basically dominated John Tuck before hurting his right hand and really losing his cool in the 3rd round and almost getting finished. Aside from those like 45 desperate final seconds, he looked really great. And hopefully, having survived that experience, he comes back knowing that, if I get injured again, I know how to deal with it. I can adapt rather than kind of going very visibly into a defensive panic shell, which is what prompted Tuck to really surge. Scott Holtzman, another solid, well-rounded fighter like Emmett, more of a wrestling attack, I would say, than Emmett, who seems to really prefer this sort of sniping, lead right, heavy, outside boxing style. Holtzman's more of a come-forward fighter, does a lot of his damage in the clinch, but does, like Emmett, sort of his skill set belies his level of experience. He throws a lot of volume. He reacts well to a firefight, better than you would think. I'm going to go with Holtzman because of the pressure and the wrestling. I'm not yet sure how Emmett is actually going to deal with the constant chain wrestling and the clinch fighting. And watching that Tuck fight, looks real good at range. Really, really struggled when the pressure was put on. So I think if Holtzman comes out here and puts on the pressure early and maintains that at a pretty steady clip throughout the fight, he will end up breaking Emmett down. But Holtzman is also a little robotic. He does look a little stiff. His comfort belies his level of experience, but his technique is sometimes a little suspicious. And so if Emmett can find the sort of rhythmic openings in Holtzman's attacks and pick him off on the way in, he could definitely change the tone of the fight.
Yeah, I knew you were going to pick Holtzman. He's one of those guys that you will always pick.
Yeah, it's like, how did I ever pick Holtzman and Drew Dober? How did I ever pick that fight? Because those are my guys.
You picked Holtzman. You were Holtzman all the way on that one.
Yeah, I was wrong.
You were.
It was real wrong.
The interesting thing to me here is that Holtzman in his last fight against Cody Pfister really looked very similar to Josh Emmett in his fight against John Tuck, especially early in that fight. Holtzman started coming in low with a lot of head movement, a lot of bobbing and weaving, a lot of quick combos in and out.
It was a really good comeback fight after the way he kind of got dragged into an ugly war by Dober.
Yeah, when he tried to out-wrestle I mean, Dober's not even a good wrestler, but Holtzman. I mean, Holtzman's a hockey player who came to MMA late,
Right.
and non-wrestlers who wrestle a lot in MMA usually end up finding guys who are much better wrestlers than them.
I would say Dober's a good wrestler.
He's not. He came up as a Muay Thai fighter in Nebraska.
Yeah, he's fine. He's not a great wrestler, but for MMA, he's got the timing and the distance, so he's okay. Like Alexander Gustafsson's not a good wrestler, but he's a very effective takedown artist.
Yeah, but there's a reason that when Dober met Olivier Aubin-Mercier was, and then decided to like get on top of him and try to out grapple and wrestle.
Well, that doesn't speak to grappling skill so much as fight IQ.
But I mean, Dober's takedown game, like he's got a power game, but it's not nuanced. It's not like. Anyway, whatever. We're not talking about Drew Dober. And the weird thing is, Josh Emmett is actually the guy here with the wrestling background.
That's true.
He doesn't wrestle that much offensively, especially. He's more of a keep myself up with my wrestling kind of fighter.
Yeah.
I'm going to take, we're disagreeing a lot today, but I'm going to take Emmett here because I think his striking variety is a lot nicer. I really liked in the tuck fight how much he went to the body, how well he was able to mix in a good kicking game, and a lot of other to really mix up a power striking attack that's unpredictable. Holtzman, he keeps improving, he keeps getting better. He's got the physical tools and the skill base to continue becoming a better fighter. But I still think that his game is still too technically. It's still, there's not enough variety in it still. He's still trying to figure out what works for him and trying to get comfortable with all the basics, trying to become a better striker, and he's become a better striker. But, I mean, I think it's going to be a fight largely of two power boxers trying to dip in and out of range. And, you're going to get two guys who are jumping in, exchanging 2 or 3 shots and getting back out, and the guys who lands the better shot will win the exchanges and win the fight and may even get a knockout. And I think Emmett's creativity is really going to carry him through there. I think that his ability to change up and to throw a larger variety of strikes with comfort is going to get him by Scott Holtzman. So that's why I'm picking Holtzman. Or I'm picking Emmett, rather, against Holtzman.
You almost surprised me there. I'm like, going with Holtzman after all of that.
No. I'm picking Emmett. I think his creativity is going to make the difference in their limited striking exchange.
Good. I like when we disagree, Zane. The discussion is better. Yep.
So Emmett opening at minus 230, now down to minus 183. Holtzman opening at plus 170, now down to plus 154. Those odds are closing. I think they should. These guys are similar in experience, similar in age, similar in style. They are, like I say, Holtzman, he came out, I think, as more of a controlling power. I want to wrestle. I want to get you in the clinch and beat you up in the clinch. But he's evolving much more of a pocket boxing style as his game goes on. And I think this is going to be a really similar style matchup fight of two power boxers who are going to go after each other and see who gets knocked out. So the only thing I might make is, let's see, fight doesn't go to decision is plus 130, or under 2.5 rounds plus 161 or plus 160. That might be the thing I would look most at. I mean, I know they're both tough guys, but it's hard to look at this fight and see two guys who are going to come forward as much as they are with as much power as they have and think that they'll both make it. I mean,
yeah, I'm checking records to see. I usually look for like a decent amount of either knockouts on one guy's record or knockout losses. And yeah, they both have a decent amount, but neither of them strikes me as like a huge finisher.
They're both guys that have been improving their boxing a lot, though. That's
definitely.
Fight to fight, their boxing keeps getting better and better and better.
Yeah, definitely. But neither guy's been knocked out, and neither guy's a huge finisher, so I'm not sure I'd bet on the finish.
Yeah, which means that I wouldn't bet on the fight.
Yeah, me neither.
Because I think it'll be a really close brawl.
I think to me it feels like a fight where the odds. I see no reason why the odds should be anything further than minus and plus 120 from one another.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that brings us to a welterweight bout. James Moontasri, Alex Morono.
What a weird fight.
I'm basically going to pick James Moontasri here. And the entire reason I'm doing so is fitness and athleticism.
Yeah.
Because, frankly, for all of Moontasri's great Taekwondo background that he has, the biggest way that shows up in the cage is in his raw athletic ability.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a carefully crafted striking game. He just throws wild shit, and sometimes some of it lands.
Yep.
And Morono throws a lot of wild shit too. He actually probably has a little more fundamentally sound striking game than Moontasri in that he keeps going forward, throws a lot of strikes.
After the first one, he throws another.
Yeah, after the first one,
that's saying a lot. Like saying Alex Morono has a technical striking game is going a little too far for me.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I won't say that much. But neither guy can wrestle to save their lives. And both guys grapple decently enough. Not great, but okay. Enough to survive, or in Morono's case, to hit submissions off his back, which he's been able to do several times regionally. I think we're gonna get a lot of stand-up, and I trust Moontasri's athleticism to see him through that, but I would not pick this fight. I would not pick it to go the distance. I would not bet on any part of it. I would not bet on it to get finished. Nothing about it at all. It will be an unpredictable, wild mess. So that's my pick. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going with James Moontasri for the same exact reason. That's really all I can say about it.
Yep.
Alex Morono impressed me with his stamina, if nothing else, against Kyle Noak, but I didn't think he deserved the win.
That's one of those fights that I looked at and I thought, Kyle Noak deserved to lose that fight.
Yeah, it was
to win it, but
it was Pettis Alvarez all over again for me. I watched it. I'm like, I scored this fight for Anthony Pettis, but I'm not upset that he lost because he needs this loss. Like he needed to learn that was not a good way to go in there and try and win the fight. And the same can be said for Kyle Noak, who really kind of did not show up for a guy in Alex Morono who had nothing for him really but just wildness.
Yeah.
That is a credit to Morono. And maybe if it comes down to wildness, he can beat Moontasri. You know, if it comes down to stamina and just continuing to push relentlessly as the fight goes on, Moontasri slows down, gets more hittable. That could totally be an opening.
Yep.
But also Moontasri could spinning back kick Morono's liver out of his body in the first round, or hit him with a flying knee, or whatever.
Morono is wide open to get hit hard as he comes in.
So open. So Moontasri, by being more dangerous, is really what it is.
Yeah, but I wouldn't pick anything in this fight at all.
No. I'm this close to not really picking a winner.
Plus, so let's see. Morono opened at plus 110. He's now down to minus 112. Moontasri opened at minus 150. He's now down to minus 110. The odds are exactly where they should be, which is dead
even, and really no way to make a profit.
No. Pick nothing in that fight. That brings us to a welterweight bout. Bryan Barberena versus Colby Covington.
I would love to see Bryan Barberena get a win here. Bryan Barberena has also established himself as one of those guys that I will just completely ride with for the rest of his career.
We just lost Connor, which is, the normal. Hey, and he's back.
I'm back. Barberena is super tough. He has made some hay on being incredibly durable, but also on not being as easy to hit as you think he is. Being way craftier, really, than anyone thinks he is, because he looks like this big, gangly, sort of foot slow bruiser, and then he comes in and he's counterpunching you when you're trying to hit him, and he's getting his back off the fence and putting you against the fence, and he's closing off the distance, and he's fighting intelligently. And so he basically looks like what happens when you give John Crouch, a guy who really wants to win and doesn't have a lot of natural talent. It's Bryan Barberena. And I shouldn't even say not a lot of natural talent, because the ability to go in there and lose a first round and win fights consistently, that's a talent. Like, that kind of mental fortitude and coachability is a real talent.
He's a fitting Dan Kelly of the welterweight division.
Totally. Absolutely. Yes. He is very much like Dan Kelly. And unfortunately for him, maybe this is Dan Kelly versus Shoeface all over again. Maybe this is Dan Kelly versus Antonio Carlos Jr. But Colby Covington is a better athlete, a crazy relentless wrestler, and yeah, I mean, that's really it. If Bryan Barberena cannot stop early takedowns from Colby Covington, he's not going to have the same opportunities he does against other fighters to come back later in the fight. Because once Covington starts taking you down, he keeps taking you down over and over again, if not just keeping you down altogether. It is almost like with a lot of Covington fights that he wins, you go from the first round to the second round, and you almost forget that they started standing again in the second round because it's like right back to Covington dominating you on the mat. And, if Covington comes in here, if he wants to work on his striking a bit, which he has shown a predilection to do in recent fights, Barberena will have his chances. But unfortunately, Bryan's also not like a big one-punch knockout artist. His chances of getting Covington out of there in like a 30-second period of striking are smaller than other people's would be.
This is actually a pretty good place for Covington to work on his striking.
Yeah, basically, because it's not that dangerous. Barberena overwhelms you when you get tired and you make mistakes. If you go through the entire 15-minute fight having I can just shoot a takedown as a reliable fallback, then you can probably beat Barberena. So I think Covington by decision is a pretty easy pick here. But I'm not about to go out and just completely count Bryan Barberena out.
Well, this is the nice thing. I've been saying this about Dan Kelly a lot lately, obviously. But the nice thing about a guy who is an eternal underdog, these eternal underdog fighters, is that no matter how many wins they get, no matter how good they look, no matter how much they surprise you, you will always pick against them in their next fight.
They're still underdogs, and it still makes total sense.
Yeah, it still makes sense. It's still absolutely the right call to make. And if they surprise you again, like if Bryan Barberena wins this fight, like if Covington shoots in sloppy and Barberena jumps on a guillotine and chokes him out, which could absolutely happened against Marley Alves. Then like Barberena faces, I don't know, like Alan Jouban or something. You might still pick Alan Jouban,
Yeah, but Barberena might definitely beat Alan Jouban.
Yeah.
I could really see that happening.
No, totally. I mean, it's not, it's nothing to, there are just so many, like, no matter how far up you go. If he fought Kamaru Usman next, you'd still pick Kamaru Usman, but Barberena could win that fight.
Maybe. Yeah, I'm still just thinking of how perfect it was that Barberena was the first foil to Sage Northcutt, because you could not find a better guy to be a polar opposite to Sage Northcutt. He's not pretty. He doesn't look very athletic. Nobody cares about him.
Nope.
And he's like not dynamic. And he just goes in there and he just is Bryan Barberena and gets a win. So yeah. I will always support Bryan Barberena for that and the win after against Warley Alves, but this is a tough one for him.
Okay, so Covington opened at minus 315 and is now at minus 366. Barberena opening at plus 235, now at plus 288. Barberena wins by submission is plus 950 to plus 1,000. You're muted.
It didn't pay off with Cub Swanson last week, Zane. These long shot submission odds.
I know, but Cub did win that fight. I mean,
Cub did win. I wish I'd bet on him as an underdog.
Yeah. But, I mean, that would be the way I would see Barberena winning this fight, if he did, would be to get a sub while Covington is shooting in.
Yeah, like Alves did, like a guillotine or a Darce or something.
Yeah. But, that's the thing about eternal underdogs is that they can win any number of fights, and you will always look at the next fight and be like, nah, he's not winning that. I got to bet against him. So That's how it is. And that brings us to a featherweight bout, Cole Miller versus Mizuto Hirota. This is a weird fight. So Cole Miller has a lot of shit going on right now, as you may have heard. I hate looking at X factors for fights, but it is hard to look past this one for Cole Miller. in that he's just doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to train. He's going in there. He's putting in the time, going through the motions, and just trying to be ready enough to show up on the day.
He's got a lot on his plate right now, Zane.
He has a lot on his plate right now. The thing is, though, that Mizuto Hirota is not a dude that you need to think a lot about fighting. He's a scrappy brawler who has a bit of a wrestling top game to back it up. But he mostly wants to be a boxer and like move in and out of range. He's very much a take turns kind of striker in MMA. Like, okay, you hit me, now I hit you, now you hit me, now I hit you. And that is the style that is going to play best into what Cole Miller does, because Cole Miller as a striker, he's got this weird thing where he's neither comfortable leading nor countering.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have either his style perfectly fits against your style, or he just is at odds in both ways. You pressure him, he does not counter. You let him lead, he overextends and reaches and gets ugly.
After the Max Holloway and Alex Caceres fights, I am ready to call Cole Miller, pound for pound, the most uncomfortable fighter in the UFC. The guy who just doesn't seem to want to be there or enjoy it at all.
But if you can get, like, I think the thing with Cole Miller is if he can get comfortable in the pocket, if he can be inside and feel like he has some control there or some comfort, that's when he starts to do well. Like, when Caceres faded late in that fight, and suddenly Cole Miller was not getting pushed around inside, suddenly Caceres was not having a great deal of success pot-shotting him, then suddenly Cole Miller's strike just turned it on and was just all over Caceres and nearly finished him.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's going to have a lot of opportunity to do that with Hirota, who just is kind of he's there and he's scrappy and he knows how to fill rounds and win rounds with volume, but there's no other real part to Mizuto Hirota's game. I don't really he could win this if Cole Miller just cannot. If Cole Miller just checks out and doesn't want to be there and is uncomfortable and just says, fuck this, whatever, this guy's not going away and I don't want to do this anymore, which he 100% could, then Hirota will be there to patiently pick at him and win rounds. But if there's any dynamic offense in this fight at all, I really do not bet on Mizuto Hirota having it. So I'm going to lean towards Cole Miller, even with all the X factors, but it's not comfortable, and it promises to be what could be a very ugly, frustrating fight.
You're as uncomfortable picking Cole Miller as Cole Miller was dealing with Alex Caceres' kickboxing game. I'm gonna put some stock into the X factor here. I'm gonna put Cole Miller in the what would Eugene put him in? He's not a Gikta. Well, he's close though. He's a guy I can't trust. And so basically for Cole Miller, I need to see that I can trust him again before I can pick him. I need to see him show up in the cage and look comfortable, look like he wants to be there. The big thing for Cole Miller, the recent stretch of losses, the no contest, has been more of a letdown for me than probably a lot of other people, because I think Cole Miller is a pretty good striker. I think he knows what he's doing. I mean, I watched that Sam Cecilia fight, and I'm like, wow, this guy's got a great jab. He's got some good, just basic. He looks like a Nate Diaz kind of, where he's slow and everything, but he knows how to move his feet. He knows how to stay out of range. He knows how to time his shots from that distance. The pressure has really, really gotten to him in recent fights in a way that I haven't seen it before, where I've started to notice really profoundly how distractible Cole is, like how inside his own head he seems to get when things aren't going his own way. You know, when Max Holloway headbutted him accidentally, that became Cole Miller's reason that he was losing for the rest of the fight. You know what I mean? Like it didn't become something he had to fight back against. It became his explanation why he was losing. He got really frustrated to the, like if it was a video game, he would have yanked out the controller and gone home. And
same thing with when the ref fucked up that Manny Gambirian fight. Suddenly the ref fucking it up
becomes the whole
TKO was just like, well, fuck it. I'm not doing this anymore.
Miller sees the narrative. He's like, oh, this is why I'm losing, and he can't escape it. And I don't think Hirota has that problem. I think Hirota is he's very consistent, and you can hurt him and you can put him in a bad position, and he just keeps coming. He throws a good amount of volume, not overwhelming, but a good amount of volume. He knows how to set up and vary his punches. He can do some clinch work against the cage and box in the pocket pretty well, especially against a fighter like Miller, who's not a massive power counterpuncher the way that Teruto Ishihara is. So I think Hirota is going to win the decision here. I think
the thing I would say is I don't think Hirota has any narrative to give Cole Miller. That's my feeling, is that for all of the head games Miller has, I just don't see any of the dynamic ability there to actually give Cole Miller something to think about other than there's a guy in front of me that I need to punch.
Maybe, yeah. I'm trying to look at fights these days from a perspective of, not just who has the same style as the guy who beat them the last time, but what are the reasons that style was effective? If we look at Anthony Pettis losing to Rafael dos Anjos, you might be tempted to say, oh, pressure. That's the way to beat Anthony Pettis. But pressure didn't work for Gilbert Melendez. And then Edson Barboza and Max Holloway really didn't need to pressure at all to beat Anthony Pettis. Both of them beat him largely off of the back foot. And the reason is that both of those kinds of losses are attributable to Pettis' lack of cage craft, his lack of footwork and distance management, the ability to enforce the kind of fight that allows him to win. And I think for Cole Miller, it's not just, can this guy pot shot and look flashy and frustrate him with weirdness? At this point, I'm wondering if it's just, can he apply consistent pressure in some way? Whether from the outside or the inside, can he make Cole Miller start to worry about where the fight is headed? And I think Hirota can do that. I think even if he has a tough first round, he may be able to actually come back and convince Miller that he's losing as the fight goes on. More the way Max Holloway did. Because Hirota responded really, really well to the 900 knockdowns Teruto Ishihara scored, enough that he made that fight a convincing draw. So I'm going to go with Hirota. I think he'll pressure and put on more volume. But, you're absolutely right. And Miller, like I said, Miller has really, really impressed me with the depth of his skill in the past. So if he can come in here and get his head together, I would not be surprised to see him actually outbox Mizuto Hirota. But until I see it, I'm gonna place Cole Miller on my can't trust him list.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Cole Miller is a good bet here by any standard. I just don't think that this fight is a good bet by any standard.
Yeah, it should be fun.
It should be fun.
I quite like both of these guys. I'm a big fan of Mizuto Hirota.
It could be. I could actually see it being really ugly. I can see a potential.
It could be really weird. Either way, I think it should be enjoyable. It could be Cole Miller losing his head or something but it should still be interesting.
So Hirota opened at minus 140. He's now at minus 116. Miller opened at plus 100. He's now at minus 107. Odds are dead even. I like that. I think that's right, and I would not touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Sure.
Mizuto Hirota is no kind of finisher. Cole Miller is often incredibly tough to finish, and neither Hirota is just, there's no excitement in his game, and for Miller, there's no trust. So it's an impossible fight to pick.
Yeah.
All right, and that brings us to the end of the last bout of the prelims. Luis Henrique da Silva versus Paul Craig. And is this you or me? I think this is...
I don't know.
Let's see.
I'm just drooling at the thought of a Frank Waston fight.
This is you.
All right.
Jr.
Frank Waston Jr. is back. Luis Henrique da Silva is quickly establishing himself as my favorite fighter at light heavyweight. He's just ridiculous. He's the craziest bastard in the entire division. And could end up being one of the best in the division because he's very young. He's obviously got some potential. He's not afraid of a firefight. The question for me going forward with Frank Waston is going to be, can he break out of this style where he gets badly hurt every time before he wins? Because if that is going to be the story of his career, he will always be worth watching, but he is not going to be a contender. And I don't know. I see some improvements from Frank Waston. You know, he's obviously got power. He's got a chin. But I do think he knows where his real strengths are. I think he knows that getting into the clinch is a good thing for him, getting his opponents back to the fence. He's not a staller in that position. He tends to stretch you out and just rail your body with knees. And he also seems to know that working the body is a good thing. It's actually been a big part of both of his last 2 wins, is that he kicks, knees, punches the body with no with no hesitation whatsoever. But he does also tend to just kind of come forward with his hands up and just hope that you can't find the path through them to his chin. And, you know, that could be dicey going forward. Fortunately for him, Paul Craig is more of a submission specialist than a knockout artist. So Frank Waston should be able to have his way mostly on the feet. And then I think he's a much better grappler than his opponents so far have expected. Obviously, he submitted the submission specialist in his last fight, and he used a really nice sweep from his back to stage the comeback in his first UFC fight against Jonathan Wilson. So I would be surprised if Craig were able to take Silva down and completely dominate him on the ground. And I would be surprised if he could really compete with him on the feet. So I'm going to go with Frank Waston by TKO, I guess.
Yeah, Paul Craig is in that unfortunate spot of being one of the few really winning light heavyweights out there, and doing it with a game whose chances of survival in the UFC are really, really limited.
He needs to start training with Jason Knight right now, because he has Jason Knight's style, but he has not yet shown himself to be a secret Diaz brother.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just like, you know, it's this. He's a very patient striker on the feet, very willing to take his time, watch what you're doing, then try to bully his way inside, push you against the cage, drag you to the floor, and be a submission artist. And that is the game with the lowest chance of success moving up to the UFC. Like, being the sub grappler is really bad territory. There are a few who succeed, obviously. I'm not saying like no sub grapplers ever make it in the UFC. That'd be a dumb thing to say. But when you're looking at who evolves and has the best chances of a long career there, the submission guys often just get hammered.
And I think it's worse at almost worse at 205 than it is at heavyweight, because yes, when you get somebody down, it's harder for them to scramble free, but also you get better wrestlers at 205. The guys are better athletes a lot of times than they are at heavyweight. And so, you know, would you rather be trying to, would you rather have a submission game against Josh Barnett or Daniel Cormier? For me, I'd rather have Josh Barnett. I think he's probably easier to take down than Daniel Cormier, you know?
Well, the 205 is the freak athlete division. That's what it really comes
like
to.
The only people who stand out are freak athletes.
Yeah. And without a dominating wrestling game, I just don't I don't see how Craig is going to find his path forward in that division. It's sort of like he's like the new Anthony Perosh. And man, did Anthony Perosh had some amazing successes, but he also had a lot of failures.
Some of the best. But I would say that the reason Perosh's successes were so easy to get behind is because they always felt so improbable. It always felt like this guy is never going to win in this division, and then he does twice. You're like, holy shit, the hippo. And I feel like Paul Craig, if only he were old and weird looking, he could be in the same situation.
Yeah, so I got to go with Henrique de Silva here too. He hits like a truck, especially his kicking game and his knees and his clinch game. That could mean that he sets himself up to be taken down by Craig inside if Craig's sweep and drag game is really, really on point. But if it's not, then I think he just gets chewed up on the feet by somebody who's tough enough to take whatever shots he has to offer and come back with something a lot harder.
Yeah.
So,
If you're not watching Frank Waston already, by the way, he's amazing. Should we explain why he's Frank Waston on every episode in which we discuss him, or has it been explained thoroughly?
if we have a new viewer out there, his nickname is Frankenstein, and in Portuguese, when somebody says Frankenstein,
Apparently,
it comes out like Frank Waston. And so when people in the U.S. wrote his nickname, or then they heard him announced,
they thought it was his real name.
Like they thought his name was Frank Waston Jr. instead of Henrique Jr.
He was billed as Frank Waston Jr.
And so in databases, in English databases for fighters, SureDog, Fight Finder, Tapology, stuff like that, he was listed as Frank Waston Jr. So that's the story of Luis Henrique de Silva. Odds on this fight, Frank Waston is a sizable favorite, opening at minus 300, now down to minus 222. Paul Craig opening at plus 220, now down to plus 181. If that line continues to close, I might suggest betting on Luis Henrique. As it is, I wouldn't bet on the line because it's a little too wide to make sense.
Yeah, it is. You might bet inside the distance on the Silva.
Or it's rather a little too narrow to make sense, I was going to say.
Yeah, so Silva is minus 160 inside the distance. If you want to go specific and go with submission or knockout, he's plus 317 to win by submission, plus 110 to win by TKO. So those may be ways to go here. You might also bet on the fight to go over under 1.5 rounds. That's a thin margin for error, but both the odds are pretty slight there. So, but still, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I guess I should actually more precisely say the odds started out wide, and they are now perfect. The odds are exactly right at this moment, plus and minus 200. I think that's just right. Yeah. If they continue to get narrower, then there's something to be said for Henrique.
Sure, yeah.
All right. Now, main card. First fight up, Alan Jouban, Mike Perry. And Mike, this is the thing. And I said this for Mike Perry's last fight against Danny Roberts, and it is almost exactly as true in this fight. In fact, I would say that it is perhaps precisely as true in this fight. Mike Perry can absolutely beat Alan Jouban.
Yeah.
Without question. There is zero doubt that he can win this fight. He shouldn't, but he absolutely can. And the reason is that Perry's game is incredibly simple. It consists of like 3 strikes that he throws all the goddamn time. Uppercut, overhand, hook. That's like about it. But he knows that. And he knows how to time them. And he knows how to set them up. And he knows how hard he hits. And he does not try to get crazy or stupid or do anything out of place.
Nor is he gun shy, nor does he like back off and give you too much space where he can't hit you.
Nope. He has a great sense of distance. He has a great sense of timing. He is tough. And he hits like a truck. And Jouban has all the tools in the world. He has 50 strikes he likes to throw all the time and can throw at any time. But it also means that he constantly is throwing some stuff that lets him get cracked hard. He'll throw some wild shit for the fun of it that people can close down and punish him for. And we saw that against Albert Tumanov, who just ran through him because he was too wild and didn't have the same fundamental skill that Tumanov does.
We've seen it in almost every Jouban fight, in fact.
Yeah, Dwyer hurt him, and Dwyer is basically just big and wild too.
Yeah, Morley Alves,
Yep.
Bilal Muhammad, like almost everybody who fights Alan Jouban, unless they're on that Brendan O'Reilly level where they're completely out of their depth,
Yep.
he has a bit of problem with them.
So I'm unfortunately going to make a pick that I do not want to make because I think Mike Perry's a little bit of a scumbag, and I'm going to pick Mike Perry to knock Alan Jouban out.
There are a lot of completely insane MMA fans who are going to be very happy to hear you say that. For some reason, Mike Perry has inspired a level of adoration. I think some of it ironic among the hardcore MMA community that I can't understand.
I don't understand it either. But dude is definitely a scumbag, or comes off as, well, no, I can say, I mean, he's a housebreaker. It's not like it's not like, oh, well, he's never, that's just how his personality comes out. I was like, no, he was breaking into people's houses, and that's why he's on parole. But
he's hilarious.
He's charismatic, and he hits like a truck, and Alan Jouban, I think, is just like, he's wild, and it's going to cost him.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? You don't want to pick Mike Perry, not even just because he's, not exactly a likable guy, but it just doesn't feel like you should be picking him against established welterweight knockout artists like Alan Jouban.
His style is so basic, but it's also one of those things of like, God, the purity of it's Dan Henderson style. It's like the purity of success when you do one thing really well and you stick to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is the thing, is that Mike Perry, I watched his tape before he came to the UFC. I was not that impressed. I was like, clearly this guy hits hard, but he's really one note. Doesn't seem to have a lot of fundamentals to his game or a lot of creativity.
I was impressed. I'll say that. I thought pretty highly of him before he...
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't. I expected him to lose in his debut just because I thought he was way too open, way too hittable. Yeah. Now, I did bet on that fight, the total, not a winner, because I knew that he could knock Hyung-Yu Lim out, and he did.
Yeah, I thought he'd lose that fight too, because he is primed to get knocked out at some point, because he just his chin is way up.
He almost got knocked out by Danny Roberts.
Yeah. He could absolutely get knocked out by Alan Jouban. It could happen.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with the stalwart MMA analyst side and say that Jouban knocks him out. But I will say that Perry hasn't just taken what he had on the regional scene and continued it. He's gotten a little better and more comfortable doing it too. He throws more volume. He's clearly more confident in the pocket than he used to be. Timing on his counters is actually really good. He just has a lot of natural abilities and is doing the right things with him. He's keeping his style simple and straightforward, but he is making the necessary adjustments, bring some more fundamentals and subtleties to it without really losing sight of what he's good at, which is hitting you harder than you can hit him. I'm going to pick Jouban for the variety of his skill set. I think Jouban, for all that he does get hurt in his fights, he also is very difficult to put away. You got to be a really kind of a next level finisher to put him away. Perry is definitely very dangerous.
Perry is a next level. He is fast becoming a next level finisher, whether he's there yet or not.
Right. At this point, is he more dangerous than Worley Alves? I'm not sure. I think he's probably a harder puncher, but is he a better finisher than Alves? I don't know.
He's a better striker than Alves as a finisher, definitely, without question.
Maybe. Worley Alves is a pretty good kickboxer and with pretty good power.
Yeah, but he's super inconsistent about how he applies that and the ranges that he chooses and the timing he chooses.
My worry is that we may also see the same thing from Mike Perry. He may run into someone and just get knocked out and not really develop from that point. He could be a guy.
Oh, yeah. He's training at a UFC gym with Alex Nicholson. I mean, there's every chance that he doesn't evolve.
Right. And that he ends up just being this really dangerous gatekeeper who doesn't actually go beyond this point. So I think that's a possibility. Now, Jouban is already basically in that position. Not going to contend most likely. But Jouban also has a much wider array of skills to fall back on. He has a kicking game. He has a clinch game. And he has a
grappler.
He's got a ground game, right? He has basically everything you need. He's not a great wrestler, but he can put Perry in trouble if Perry follows him to the ground. He can put Perry on the ground in a number of different ways with different strikes, and he can take a good shot. He tends to leave himself a little too open, but he's a good adjuster, and if he can survive, he can get a lot of guys out of there. And I think Perry is too hittable and too one note still, but like you said, Zane, absolutely Perry could knock him out. I mean, it almost feels more likely than when he fought Hyung-Yu Lim, because we now know that he can do it to a fighter of that level. And Jouban is, has more of a propensity for getting hit and hurt early in fights than even Hyung-Yu Lim does. So
Jouban's been knocked out. I mean,
yeah, he's not unstoppable.
Knocked him out. It's not like it's impossible.
Not at all. He's not unstoppable, and we have seen him hurt, and we have now seen him finished. So yeah, I'm gonna pick Jouban. Variety does it for me. The depth of his bag of skills, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Fans loving themselves some Mike Perry. He opened at -140, is now at -133, and Jouban at +100, now at +109. I would say as long as Perry is training at the same camp, as long as he is a favorite, there's a worthwhile underdog bet against him to get knocked out.
Under 1.5 rounds is -105.
That's, yeah. So
definitely.
If you want the safety bet, that's a good one. Jouban by KO is +280. That's also not bad.
Yeah. I'm going to go with the total because it's so safe, but it's such a dicey fight. I just have trouble in these fights. Like I said, the Lim Perry fight, I hit on that bet because I bet on it at the total because both guys were knockout artists and both guys were hittable. I think that's the way to go here.
Yeah, I'm just saying down the road, for the foreseeable future, if Mike Perry continues being a favorite, there's a very good chance that he gets knocked out cold sometime soon.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think like Mike Perry, Cody Garbrandt, there's quite a few guys right now who are in this position where at some point, and Mike Perry's not even on Garbrandt's level.
No, Garbrandt at least has the footwork and has some defensive sensibility.
More fluidity, more flow to his style, definitely.
Yeah. That brings us to a bantamweight fight, Urijah Faber versus Brad Pickett. Take it away.
Oh, it's a fight that deserves to be paid attention to because both of these guys have put in their dues in a really big way, and I think it could very conceivably be the last time we see either of them in the pro MMA cage. Brad Pickett hasn't gone into this fight saying that it will be his retirement fight the way Faber has, but he also said that if he hadn't won against Francisco Rivera, he would have retired. And that fight was kind of fluky. I think most people thought he didn't deserve to get the win there, and then he comes in his next fight and gets absolutely destroyed by Uriel Alcantara. So it seems very likely that Brad Pickett, like Urijah Faber, is right there on the fence saying,
he did talk about after that fight that I'm going to take the pressure off myself to retire. I could easily be back in the hunt or something. So I don't know, but maybe. I would like him to be in. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to tell him to retire, but
no, I don't feel good telling any fighter to retire. There are guys that I don't want to see come back. I don't want to see George St. Pierre make his return. There are guys that I'm a big fan of that I don't want to see look bad. But at the same time, if they want to go in there, they accept the risks and they want to keep trying, then they have every right to do so.
They're adults, yeah.
Absolutely. So, Faber he's still pretty close to the guy he's always been. And that is probably the best and worst thing you can say about Urijah Faber is that he has never really developed, but he also has never hit the cliff, hit the wall in the way you would expect him to, especially at this age. The guy is now 37 years old. He's fast coming up on 38. He's still one of the best athletes in his division. He's still way faster than you think he would be, especially small guys. When they get older, they tend to fall off much harder than the big guys. He's fighting at a heavyweight age in the bantamweight division and still doing pretty well for himself. So there are a lot of good things you can say about Urijah Faber as an old fighter. And I think most of those things are the reasons why he deserves to be a favorite here against Brad Pickett. Being a great scrambler, having really good timing, especially on more rote strikers like Brad Pickett, having really good timing with his right hand and his takedowns, being a dogged clinch fighter, having solid ground and pound, like all of these things that allow that if Urijah Faber is bigger and stronger and faster than you, he can make these things work. Those are the reasons to pick him here. I think Brad Pickett, once upon a time, would have contended with Urijah Faber, would have been competitive with him. At this point, Brad Pickett is markedly slower than he was before, markedly more hittable and more vulnerable when he does get hit. you look at these two, Urijah Faber looks like a guy who the game has passed him by. Brad Pickett looks like a guy who is really past his best. That's the difference here. So I'm going to pick Urijah Faber by, let's see what I went with in my preview, by decision. So, but a finish wouldn't surprise me. I could definitely see him stopping Pickett, but Pickett is still tough. It still takes a pretty crazy finisher to get him out of there. Yuri Alcantara. I think that if Faber is himself a little faded, he may not be able to get the finish on Pickett, but I think he will pretty comfortably win.
I'm actually going to take Faber by submission, I think, here. For a little club and sub action.
Makes sense to me. Club and sub. I like it.
Yep. Yeah, it's just Faber, what we even saw in the Jimmy Rivera fight is a fighter in Faber who, even when he's just totally outclassed, is still like surviving, knows all the tricks, knows how to stay in the fight and at least like not just get knocked out and run over.
You can bet your ass that Brad Pickett would have lost that Frankie Saenz fight.
Yeah.
And that fight was insane. And Urijah Faber went in there at 36 years old and put it on Frankie Saenz and got a very convincing win.
Yeah. Faber is, and I think part of it too is, maybe he's survived so well, not just because he's a bowling ball of an athlete and always has been, but because he has, like, for all of his faults of not changing up his style, he's also just remained really confident in his style all the way through. Like as he's gone on, that confidence in what he can do and how he can do it has never waned. And you see that in the cage. Like, if he thinks that he can hurt you, if he thinks he's got the edge, he knows how to press his skills. He knows exactly what his body is capable of and how he can make that happen. So, yeah, I think Pickett just doesn't seem durable enough to fight the way he used to, and I don't even know that he's any way slower than he used to be, but the durability is a major thing because he's never been a great defensive fighter. He's always been a fighter who had to walk through fire to make his style work, and he's not walking through fire anymore.
Credit to Urijah Faber, because like Jose Aldo, for a lot of fighters, would have been the end of him.
Yeah.
That would have ended his career. He'd already been in there for a really long time, already compiled 26 fights, and he has gone on now for 7 years almost past that and been very competitive with the best. Urijah Faber, he rubs me the wrong way. He's not always very likable. I think he's a little exploitative. He frustrates me a bit because he's a fighter who has never really figured out what his real flaws are. But you have to, at the end of the day, I always come back to giving Urijah Faber credit for being such a good fighter for so long.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that'll probably be the story he carries through his last fight in the octagon.
Absolutely. And the odds on that, Faber opened at -400. He's now at -439. Pickett opened at +280, now at +336. That all seems right to me. I'm not surprised the odds are getting wider even. And I don't think there's any bet to make there at those odds. Especially, too, with not even a finish. Because like I said, I'm picking Faber by submission. But it's, as, you got two guys who are getting towards the end of their career. You don't want to bet on either of them, like, putting on like this really hyper aggressive performance where they absolutely finish their opponent.
Yeah. Under 2.5 rounds +120. That's not terrible.
Yeah, that's not terrible. Pickett's durability problems are becoming pretty stark at this point.
Faber inside the distance is +129.
I mean, I think he would have been knocked out by Francisco Rivera had Rivera been functionally better at pressing his style. But the more I've seen, like, as I continue seeing Rivera's game, he's got one of the Cole Miller style. He's got one of the weirdest striking games I've ever seen, where it's like there is this much margin of hyper success and skill, and then these huge gaps on either side of just complete weirdness. Yeah.
Once again, I'll bring up Anthony Pettis, but it's like this really, like this is a specific way that if the fight goes this way, you can definitely beat almost anybody. And if they figure out how to make it not go that way, but Brad Pickett, man, like almost knocking out Tomas Almeida last year.
No, Pickett doesn't have that. He's much more of a meat and potatoes, you know.
Yeah. But and also like Faber kind of. Faber's meat and potatoes is more like
here is
tofu.
a potato, here is a steak, but they are the nicest potato and the best steak you've ever had.
Well, but it's not even steak and potatoes. It's like the California version because it's very specific to Faber. It's like
here's some ahi tuna and
right. here's a poke bowl. It's like here's your tuna and your rice and your avocado. That's Urijah Faber's game.
Yeah.
Brad Pickett's is definitely meat and potatoes, but both guys in a similar way have found remarkable success with really straightforward, unchanging approaches to MMA.
Yep. All right, that brings us to our co-main event, Sage Northcutt versus Mickey Gall, and a fight that is, to coin the Ralph Nader phrase, unsafe at any speed. If you think you have a great beat on this fight, you are lying to yourself and to everyone who listens to you, most particularly because of Mickey Gall. Mickey Gall has his opponents have a combined record of 0-1 heading into his fights,
which isn't terrible.
0. His opponents have a combined record of 0 heading into his fights, and
0-0, which
overall record of 0-3.
0-3.
Now, having fought him,
isn't the worst thing in the world for a guy with 3 fights.
No, it's how it should be.
Totally logical trajectory. The difference is that Mickey Gall, by some weird kismet, is now in the UFC and has established himself. I mean, I'm glad that he's here to fight Sage Northcutt. I'm glad that the UFC must be really grateful because what are they going to do? They're going to match Sage Northcutt with Henrique Marin for the rest of his career until he comes over? No,
they got a legit co-main event fight out of Sage Northcutt at this point in his career by having a dude who can absolutely call him out.
Yeah. One that feels competitive and interesting, even if it may not be.
Yeah. So Mickey Gall, at this point, you could basically consider Mickey Gall having only had an amateur career still, to date. The biggest success of his career has been the fact that he competes in the UFC and has experience fighting on a big stage. That's it. And he handles that marvelously well. Otherwise, as everybody is amateur regional level fighters, even as pros. Like there's no oh yeah, now he's got a legit pro fight under his belt. It's, like Mike Jackson and CM Punk that would be kind of explode style matchmaking.
Yes, definitely.
If we're being honest, I am still going to pick Mickey Gall to beat Sage Northcutt. And I am going to do it for really a couple of key reasons. The first being that Sage Northcutt is hittable by just about anyone, no matter how bad a striker they are. He fights in these impossible offensive flurries, and he's trying not to more lately. But that means that he's just less overwhelming than he used to be, which is kind of like, dance with the girl that brought you, Sage.
Sure, yeah.
And his defense is not there. Like, without all the offense, his defense in the pocket when in range is very much like, I'm watching you. Are you going to hit me? Because if you do, I'm just going to stand here. And then I'll get out of the way after you hit me.
I do want to suggest as a new nickname for Sage Northcutt based on that aphorism you just dropped. He should be Sage Sadie Hawkins Northcutt. I think is really the best way to go. And Sage Northcutt listens to Reliant K. He thinks that shit rocks hard.
Oh, yes. So this is all true. So the other part of this is that you don't have to be a very good wrestler to get Sage Northcutt down, where his grappling is still not great. So Mickey Gall may still not be a very good striker at all. There's no reason to think that his hands are great. They may not be bad, but there's, we have no proof of that. But what we do know is that as a functional transition grappler, he has a really good idea of what he's doing. The way he beat the piss out of CM Punk, while entirely expectable, was also the kind of completely controlled, cold-blooded performance that shows that you have a incredibly solid fundamental understand of position grappling and how to do damage and how to work positions.
It doesn't tell you as much as people often want it to, but it is very valuable still for a guy to go into a fight and win in exactly the way he's supposed to win.
Well, and to ride positions while landing big shots.
Right. But really just the overall performance, just to dominate when he should dominate. That's a good sign.
Because you can see a lot of guys too, like they get guys on the ground at a regional level and they just hold them there. They just hold them down and try to keep position as best they can, or they throw every strike they can and they let the guy up. Those are usually what you see out of guys on the ground regionally who are learning that part of the game. So to see Gall hold position and land strikes at the same time, that's like actually a good sign for him. And that all has me worried about Sage Northcutt. Like, Henrique Marin is not any kind of athletic specimen. He's not a great wrestler by any stretch. He is a trip and drag grappler, just in the same way Gall is. And he's a lot more experienced, but Gall is way more confident. Like, Mickey Gall is going to come out absolutely certain that he can beat Sage Northcutt. You know this. Like, we've seen it. And it's one of the problems for young fighters, too, is that they are absurdly overconfident in their games. It's how Sage Northcutt started, too. And we're starting to see some of that confidence change. We're starting to see Northcutt slow down. We're starting to see him take a little more time. I think if Gall just goes out there, charges him, and drags him to the mat, he can get him down. I think if he can get him down, he can submit him. So I'm going to pick Mickey Gall. But you are literally looking at a fighter who it might as well be still making his pro debut. This will be the first real fight of Mickey Gall's career.
Yeah.
And it'll tell us way more than anything else he's done.
I can't justifiably say that that Mickey Gall can't win this fight. He absolutely can. And I would not be surprised really in the slightest if he did in exactly the fashion you described. What I can confidently say is that there is no real reason to believe that Mickey Gall will win this fight just yet. You know, Mickey Gall has looked good in fights where he absolutely needed to look good. You know what I mean? Not in fights where, like, if Mickey Gall had gone out there and not looked good against CM Punk, it would have been bad. You know, if he hadn't dominated,
he would just not be a reasonably pro level fighter.
Yeah, and he would have looked like a guy who maybe shouldn't be in the UFC yet, which is what he still possibly is.
He is.
Right.
He's still that guy.
Right. 3-0 with basically no reputable wins of any kind whatsoever. What you can say confidently about Mickey Gall is that he has a lot of swagger. He's very, very confident. And that is, I think, for him, a strength more than it is a weakness. He goes in there, he's not going to be cowed by anything flashy that Sage Northcutt can do in the same way other opponents might be. So that's a good thing for him. The other thing you can confidently say about Mickey Gall is that he is a very well-trained grappler. He executes on the ground in a way that suggests serious schooling. He is not worried about losing position. He knows his transitions. He always seems to be a step ahead. Granted, the UFC couldn't even make CM Punk look good in his training footage with some very careful editing.
No.
I think CM Punk is probably pretty bad at everything he does in the MMA world. And that's not, not a slight on him. The guy started when he was, 39 years old? But
37, but yeah.
Something. But he looked, even for a guy who I thought had some kind of training background with Henrique Gracie in them, he looked in the training footage and in the fight like a guy, like a white belt, like a first day white belt. Yeah. He looked the way I would look on the mat. And so, again, there's no reason to really draw too much from that performance other than just look at Mickey Gall. Does he look confident? Does he look comfortable? Yes. Sage Northcutt, I think that the temptation here is to say that, Sage Northcutt's going to lose because we know he's vulnerable to grappling. The problem is we have no idea what Mickey Gall is vulnerable to yet. We don't know what styles he struggles against. We don't know where his technical weaknesses are. We don't know if he crumbles under pressure when it's put on. We don't know if he loses heart when he can't submit a guy when he gets him to the ground. We don't know if he can take a shot. We don't know anything about Mickey Gall in the totality of how he performs in a tough fight. And the temptation is to say that he's going to beat Sage because we do know those things about Sage. But just because we know Sage doesn't mean, like Sage is in this position where we've seen him lose, we've seen him struggle, we've seen him almost lose to guys that shouldn't really be beating him at this point. And so we can say, all right, he's not actually as good as we thought. In fact, he's much, much worse. Mickey Gall is now the new Sage Northcutt. He's now the new guy who hasn't been tested and is supposed to blow everyone out of the water. And taking care of the old guy is going to be his first step on that track. And I think that is a bit of a mistake. Not that, again, Mickey Gall can't win here, but Sage Northcutt has learned from those experiences, whereas Mickey Gall hasn't even had them yet. And that may make Mickey Gall look like the stronger choice or the stronger fighter overall, but it is, I can paint a styrofoam ball to look like an Atlas stone and lift it over my head. And you might think I'm really strong, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be any better off when you drop a real stone on my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Sage Northcutt, pretty good fighter. Technically needs obvious development in his ground game, but transitions, he's top notch. He's got an innate ability there, scrambling to the back, capitalizing on an opening, getting a finish, great at all those kinds of things. And striking, I think, is coming along. Not great, as you said, but coming along, and definitely speed and power, timing and accuracy. You have to imagine Sage Northcutt has an advantage over Mickey Gall there. Like, even you picking Mickey Gall or anyone else picking Mickey Gall can't be surprised if Sage Northcutt just immediately hits Mickey Gall with a clean right hand or a head kick early into the fight, or keeps him at bay and makes him work to get inside with side kicks and leg kicks. I'm going to go with Sage Northcutt. It's a toss-up fight still to me, but I feel like I know what Sage Northcutt's strengths and weaknesses are, and no new weakness could possibly surprise me from Mickey Gall because I don't know yet. So if Mickey Gall comes out here and gets knocked out with one punch, I'll be like, yeah, that totally could have happened, and I had no reason before this fight to think that it wouldn't. And until I see that those things won't happen, I won't pick a guy like Mickey Gall over a more established fighter like Sage.
That is fair. I think the reasons that I'm willing to pick Mickey Gall here are that in the UFC against some of the worst athletes they could find to put him against, Sage Northcutt has not been an overwhelming, unstoppable force, which means that I think at some point Mickey Gall is going to get an opportunity.
Right. And he's not been dominating the fights he's supposed to dominate, where Mickey has. But then again, I think Henrique Marin,
that's not even like me talking about Mickey Gall being able to dominate the fights he's supposed to dominate or anything like that. It's just looking at the fundamental potential of Gall's game and saying Sage Northcutt will give him that opportunity. And I think that Mickey Gall is a better athlete than the guys that Northcutt has been surviving against in those opportunities.
Definitely. Mickey Gall's solid, man. He's got potential. But I also think Henrique Marin would probably beat Mike Jackson and CM Punk.
Cody Pfister and Henrique Marin would have beat all the guys that Mickey Gall has already beat. I'm not calling this on record by any stretch. Yeah. I'm basically looking at this as Sage, as two super inexperienced fighters, and I'm looking at two good athletes. Mickey Gall looks like he's at least reasonably big and strong.
I think he has a bit of a size advantage here, actually.
We don't know how. Yeah, he definitely has a size advantage. We don't know how tough he is because we just don't. But assuming he's super confident, and I have to assume that if you're that confident, you're usually pretty tough. Like, that you can take a shot pretty decently. Okay, you've sparred enough to know that.
Yeah.
And so, assuming that Sage Northcutt is not a amazing first round out of the gate finisher, which he's not in general, then I have to look at the opportunities that Gall's going to get. Do I think that he can do enough? His positional grappling is enough, and his athleticism is enough to make them count. And I think it is. But that's it.
We're basically predicting a fight based on more or less potential from two guys.
Yep.
Both of them, we're really picking up potential more than anything.
I'm not also not I'm just not I'm not loving the direction I'm seeing Northcutt going.
Oh, I could talk for a long time about Northcutt's father and what's going on with his training, and I have a distinct feeling like Sage Northcutt may never pan out.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I have the feeling that the biggest thing that may happen is that he's going to lose confidence in his game. And as that confidence goes, the skill won't have been put there to replace it. And that sucks. So
he did pretty effectively prep Tyron Woodley for Stephen Thompson, though. That worked out better than we thought it would.
Yeah. No, I could, it's just a feeling. So Sage Northcutt opened at plus 100. He's now minus 106. Mickey Gall opened at minus 140. He is now minus 117. I'm glad those lines are closing. There is no reason they should be anything other than dead even. Do not bet on this fight. Do not bet on Mickey Gall. Do not bet on Sage Northcutt. These people are neophytes. Anything can happen at this level.
I'll be honest. I think there's reason the line should be wider. I think it justifiably Mickey Gall should be a bigger underdog, and if he were, I might bet on him.
Mickey Gall's the favorite, so
right. Yeah. That's what's surprising to me is that Mickey Gall with a completely meaningless record. I do think people are really a little too confident in what his abilities may be.
Yeah, I wouldn't touch it at all. There's just and the truth being too, like for Northcutt being a reasonable finisher in the past. This is the toughest guy that he will have faced. This could be the toughest guy. I won't say it is. It could be that he has like with potentially the least chance of or the best chance of beating. So he didn't finish Enrique Marin either, who's not particularly tough or athletic.
Finished by Enrique Marin.
Yeah, he was almost finished by him. So it's just there's no betting on this fight. There's no over. There's no under. Either guy could get caught instantly. Either guy could get knocked out instantly.
That's the thing. This card, right? This is not for hardcore MMA fans, people who tune up for the pay-per-views and everything. Like, oh, how can I bet on these fights or what's interesting about them? This is not a fight for that kind of person, but it remains mysteriously interesting, very compelling despite the fact that, maybe just because of the fact that both guys seem to matter, and yet we have no idea what either of them can really do.
Yep. All right, so that brings us now to the main event, Paige VanZant versus Michelle Waterson. And I actually think this one's pretty easy to pick.
Really?
And I saw the odds, and I'm a bit shocked at them, frankly.
Okay.
I love Michelle Waterson. She's awesome. But she's kind of so-he-hom with a more dangerous grappling game and less technical fundamental strategy and basics.
Yep.
And I don't see her having a great deal of success at 115 in the UFC. Paige VanZant is a massive bully who can push people around, overwhelm them with power, outwork them, just stay ahead with persistence. And Waterson's somebody who, when she got drugged into a scramble with 4'11" Hirota DiBercio, got subbed. Angela Magana took her to the third round. Size is a major problem for Waterson because she does not fight with any power, and she fights with a lot of dynamicism. So she needs range, she needs space to set up her funky striking. And if you bully her, she ends up in a grappling battle where she could win or she could lose, and I don't think she wins against Paige. I think Paige is just too big and too strong and can stifle too much of her game. So I think this is a pretty clear pick to me for Paige VanZant.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. I think the best way to describe both of these women is that they look like blue belts in their grappling, which maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to everyone, but I think jiu-jitsu people will know that kind of the progression between the belts, through the belts, tends to be you suck at white belt. At blue belt, you know enough to get submissions, but you don't have the discipline to really lock down position and defend yourself that well. And then that sort of, you become more disciplined and more focused on what your strengths really are as you get better in the art. That is what both Paige VanZant and Michelle Waterson strike me as, in really every aspect of their game. Both of them seem to have some idea of where they're dangerous. They have an idea of definitely how to grapple and how to scramble to better positions. Both of them are really open to being reversed or countered or controlled by a better fighter, somebody who is farther along in that belt spectrum. And so against each other, I think we'll see we have a good chance of seeing a lot of crazy scrambles. Michelle Waterson, one of the most aggressive submission artists that VanZant has fought, more aggressive even than some of the better submission artists she has fought, because Waterson is a blue belt. She tends to go after all of those opportunities, going for arm bars, even though she's stuck in bottom half guard, things like that. That can work, and it has worked against some good grapplers for her. And then VanZant, also very aggressive, but more specialized to striking. She's actually got a real knack for ground and pound, from a stacked guard, from a standing position on knee on belly. She's pretty solid at finding posture and raining down those straight punches and staying on top of her opponent while they try to scramble underneath her. But we've also seen her caught in some submissions before. Felice Herrick put her in a few submission holds. Rose Namajunas, of course, put her in about 1 million different arm bars before finally tapping her. So we know that both these women are a little vulnerable to being subbed, and both these women are pretty dangerous on the ground.
Well, I would say we know Paige VanZant is vulnerable to being put in submissions.
Yes.
Is much less vulnerable to being submitted.
Yes, by and large, it has taken a lot of work to submit Paige VanZant in the one time that she was actually submitted.
Yeah.
Then again, Waterson's fought more than VanZant, so maybe VanZant, but VanZant definitely seems to keep cool and escape from submissions well, but she definitely gets put in them.
Yeah.
I think what it really comes down to here, it's going to be a fight where distance management matters a lot, directionality matters a lot, and pace matters a lot. And I think Paige VanZant just has more things in her arsenal to make those things go her way. I don't think Waterson is such a great outfighter that she can keep VanZant at distance. She's not going to do a Stephen Thompson thing and keep her at bay and play Matador. She tends to get backed up a little too easily in straight lines towards the fence. And she also tends to throw herself into the clinch a lot with her strikes, where she'll hit you, and then blue belt mentality takes over. She's like, all right, I had some success. Go for it. And she just unleashes 4 strikes in a row, and then she's right in the clinch, or being taken down. And those things are problems against VanZant, who technically anywhere is not really amazing. The one skill set where she really seems to have a real knack, like I said, is the ground and pound. But everywhere, her physicality carries her through. And that physicality, she's big, she's strong, especially against a former atomweight like Waterson. I think that physicality is going to play a role more and more as the fight goes on. So if VanZant can close down that distance or get Waterson on the ground, each round should get a little easier for her to impress her strength, to push the pace, to control Waterson. It is harder for me than for you to count Waterson out, to say that, it doesn't feel like an easy pick for me. But I do think that
Waterson struggle with Magana was a wake up for me on that.
Yeah, I just think Waterson may have difficulty with her size, and she would need to be a really, really smart technical outfighter to make her style work against these bigger women, especially when it's a bigger woman who is as patently aggressive as a 12 gauge Paige. So I'm going with VanZant by I went with 4th round TKO.
I can see that. Yeah, I mean, it's just I really love Michelle Waterson and her style, but it's not geared for success against bigger, more physical fighters. It's just not.
She's her game is, I mean, it's fun and it looks like it should be really good, but it's kind of James Moontasri-esque.
It's very James Moontasri-esque.
Without the crazy athleticism and strength. It's kind of like, all right, try this crazy technique. It's a lot of old school Mike Winklejohn style kickboxing where it's like, what can I surprise them with next? But it's not like, okay, how can I control the distance? How can I establish this threat, use it to set up the other threat? It's more like, all right, I tried a head kick. Now I'll try a spinning back kick. It's like, what's different than the last thing I did? There's not as much careful thought to it. VanZant definitely does not have that either. But VanZant's style is more forgiving for technical flaws because she is an aggressor and she's strong and she's got great heart and determination and doesn't seem to know where her strengths. Now, here's the thing, Zane, because now that I've said all this, what if Paige VanZant comes out and tries to kickbox with Michelle Waterson?
I think she's got a big enough power edge to beat her.
Maybe. But that's what she did against Bec Rawlings, who is pretty powerful. Not bad, has gotten better as a boxer, but is not a great boxer.
No.
And she lost a round to Bec Rawlings, and at no point in that round did she say, all right, I got to get her against the fence and start working her in the clinch. And it didn't seem like she had any intention of doing that up to the point that she knocked her out. So if VanZant's idea, because there's something that Paige said a few years ago that stuck in my head. She said, I'm a swarmer for now. Maybe someday when I get better, I'll be more technical and more careful. But right now, I'm a swarmer. I go over there and I overwhelm people. And I worry that she may have this idea in her head that swarming is only something you do when you're an amateur. And when you get better, you become a really slick outside kickboxer. And that's going to lead her astray.
Here's the thing. How many decisions do you think Michelle Waterson has won in her career?
Based on your question, I'm going to guess not many.
2. One of them was a split.
Yeah.
She has 3 TKOs. No, actually make that. Yeah, 3 TKOs, one of which was a corner stoppage. The other 2 were against very small Japanese fighters who were primarily grapplers. And of every other win she has is a submission.
And 3 of her losses are finishes.
And 3 of her losses are finishes.
She's gone to decision 3 times.
Michelle Waterson is just not a dominating or imposing force without a certain type of fighter in front of her.
But that's my fear, is that if VanZant comes out and tries to kickbox with
VanZant,
range,
just in her physicality, is immediately, I think, not that type of fighter. Even in a kickboxing fight, just the size and the range and any strength, power for power, strength for strength.
VanZant is not going to knock Waterson out with a jumping round kick to the jaw.
No, but if she even stings Waterson, she might force Waterson to try to grapple with her. She might force Waterson to close her down.
My worry is that in the last fight, she got that knockout, which could enforce her thinking this is the way to fight. I got a knockout, even though in that fight, her coaches said, stop throwing that bullshit.
I know.
Get after her. And she didn't do it.
I know.
She seemed to have no intention of doing what really has brought her here.
I know, but I really...
So all I'm saying is, even if that's not a guaranteed Waterson win, that is a path for Waterson to win if VanZant comes in here and tries to fight that fight. That allows Waterson into the fight in a big way.
It could. Let me put it this way. There is room for Paige VanZant to lose a pure kickboxing match if all she does is range kickbox, and at no point does she land any significant offense or get any kind of other game going. However, I don't know that Michelle Waterson would even give her a pure kickboxing battle. I don't think Michelle Waterson is going to stay outside for a whole fight, even if she's winning there. So... I
did pick Paige. I have fears, Zane. Okay, I have fears.
I know you have fears. So now,
man racked by night terrors. I just fall asleep at night. I can barely sleep. I'm just like, what if Paige VanZant tries to round kick Michelle Waterson the whole fight?
Okay, now here's some funky bananas. Michelle Waters or Paige VanZant opened at -160, is now -116, and Michelle Waterson opened at +120 and is now -107. Or no, even or yeah, at +120 is now -107. This fight is dead even in the odds, and I think that's ridiculous. I think that's absolutely ridiculous that this fight would be dead even in the odds.
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I do think VanZant should be favored, but I am also, again, like I think VanZant should be favored.
You are panic stricken. I understand this.
I'm thinking VanZant should be favored on the basis of how I know she can win fights. That's the thing. I'm picking VanZant. I'm picking VanZant, saying she's going to go in there and do to Waterson what she did to Kylan Curran. But if she goes in there and does to Waterson what she did to Beck Rawlings, if that is a development for her, if it's not just a one fight thing where she was trying it out, but that's a new development for her, then that is troubling.
Here's the thing, though. Beck Rawlings has been working to develop an outboxing game and is at least as big as Paige VanZant. Like,
she's bigger, I think. She's a big strawweight.
She's a big strawweight who has been working for a long time now to try to develop this crafty outboxing game.
Yeah,
where she sticks and moves and does a lot, and she's actually gotten better at it. Like,
yeah, but that's Michelle Waterson's been developing that kind of game for her whole career.
Michelle Waterson has an out-kicking game, and she doesn't necessarily keep it all that well.
No.
I don't trust Michelle Waterson's boxing all that much.
I'm just not comfortable writing Michelle Waterson off here, Zane. I'm too worried about what Paige.
I love Michelle Waterson, but I think outside, I think she's going to have, I think like Jessica Penne and like some of the other women who have moved up from atomweight as like the classic scrappers that people love to watch in Invicta, going ahead in the UFC could just be ridiculously tough for them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think Paige may be in a similar position where they're going to have to feed her a certain kind of fighter to keep her record.
Could be, but like Paige has the physicality, at least.
Is Paige VanZant going to beat Tisha Torres or Carla Esparza or Rose Namajunas or Karolina Kowalkiewicz or Ioana Jędrzejczyk or Claudia Gadelha? No.
I might pick her against Tisha Torres, maybe.
Tisha already beat her once.
That's true. Tisha did already beat her once.
I don't think she'd beat any of those women. So I'm just, the thing is Paige VanZant, she's established herself. I feel like I can pick her because I know what she does. And that's why I'm worried, because now I'm worried that maybe I don't know what she does. And based on pure talent, I think we've seen how far she can go.
Yeah.
Just based on talent alone. But again, Rose Namajunas is much better than Michelle Waterson. So who knows?
Well, much more physical than Michelle Waterson.
Definitely.
That's the thing. This to me is completely a matchup of physicality. It's not a matchup of anything else.
That is the basis of my pick. Yeah.
So I don't even consider it. Like, that's why I'm so set on it, is because I don't consider it a matchup of, well, technically this is how it could play out different. I'm looking at this as a physicality matchup and saying I think that Waterson's at too many disadvantages. All right. On that note, find me on Twitter at TheZaneTime, and you can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. If you're watching this video on YouTube, give it a like. That's a thumbs up down there. That helps us a lot. Subscribe to MMANation.com. It's DOTCOM. That's our YouTube channel. That's where we find all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, interviews, all that good stuff. We will not be back. We'll be back next week with the MMA Depressed Us instead of a Vivisection, and we'll have If I Did It and Knuckle Up and all that other stuff, but no UFC event. We finally get a break, and we are going to take it to watch some terrible fights because we hate ourselves. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.